James Miller stood on his front lawn, tears streaming down his face, clutching a photograph of his missing baby girl, while the world watched in sympathy. Yet behind those shaking hands and desperate cries lay a dark secret that would shatter everything the town thought they knew. The small town had always felt safe. The kind of place where children played freely on the sidewalks and neighbors waved from their porches. Nothing about the quiet streets suggested danger, which is why the night of the disappearance felt so impossible to believe. The call to the police came just after midnight, when a father's trembling voice reported his 6-month-old baby missing from her crib. The words carried urgency and terror, sending officers rushing to the family home. From the outside, the house appeared untouched. No broken locks, no shattered windows, nothing to suggest someone had forced their way inside. Yet inside the nursery, the crib stood empty, the blanket neatly folded at the corner, as though nothing had ever happened. That eerie detail unsettled the first responders who stepped into the room. Most kidnappings left behind chaos, but this scene looked oddly calm. By the time news of the missing baby spread, the neighborhood was buzzing with speculation. Police cars lined the street, their flashing lights casting harsh red and blue glows across the homes. Reporters soon arrived, pushing microphones toward anyone willing to speak. Neighbors recounted the sounds of sirens and the sudden flurry of activity. People whispered theories in hushed tones, unwilling to accept that something so horrifying could happen so close to home. Families began locking their doors earlier, and mothers clutched their children tighter, worried that a stranger might be lurking somewhere nearby. At the center of it all stood the baby's father, a man whose face was streaked with tears as he begged for help finding his daughter. Cameras captured his trembling hands and his voice breaking under the weight of grief. For many, his display of sorrow was heartbreaking, proof of a parent's unimaginable loss. But for the investigators walking in and out of the house, small questions began to form. They noticed the father's story had gaps, moments where his timeline didn't make complete sense. They noticed the mother's silence, her eyes fixed on the ground as her husband spoke loudly to the cameras. The more they looked, the more the scene felt staged rather than spontaneous. The first chapter of the case closed with uncertainty hanging in the air. Was this truly a kidnapping, the work of an intruder who had slipped into the house unnoticed? Or was something more disturbing hidden behind the tears of a desperate parent? The town waited for answers, but unease had already taken root, leaving everyone with the sense that the truth would be far darker than they imagined. The father's image quickly became the focus of the unfolding tragedy. Each day, he stood outside his home, holding photographs of his missing daughter for the cameras to see. His face was wet with tears. His voice cracked as he pleaded for her safe return, and his hands shook as though grief had overtaken every part of him. To the public, this display was touching, a picture of a man shattered by loss. But for investigators, the emotions felt almost too precise, too perfectly placed for the cameras that recorded his every move. In the quiet of the police station, detectives studied every word he spoke, comparing them to the evidence already in their possession. They knew appearances could mislead, and the man's grief, while convincing, could also be a mask. The mother's role was harder to read. Unlike her husband, she rarely spoke. She stood back, her face pale and drained, as though she wanted to vanish from the scene entirely. She didn't plead with reporters, didn't hold signs, didn't reach for the spotlight. Her silence created questions of its own. Was it shock, or something else? Some neighbors claimed she looked frightened rather than heartbroken, as though she carried a secret she dared not share. Detectives wondered whether her silence was protection or complicity, and they began to press harder for details from both parents. Behind the scenes, the timeline built by the father began to unravel. Phone records revealed late-night calls he had not mentioned. Surveillance cameras from a nearby street caught his car moving long after he claimed to be asleep. Neighbors added to the confusion when they reported hearing strange noises in the early hours, sounds that didn't match the story of a quiet night disturbed only by discovery. Each inconsistency chipped away at the picture of an innocent father searching desperately for his child. As the days dragged on without any sign of the baby, the sympathy the father once commanded began to shift. His public displays grew more dramatic, almost exaggerated, as if he was trying to prove his grief. Investigators noticed his sobs often erupted when the cameras were rolling, but disappeared when he thought no one was watching. The suspicion grew heavier, hanging in the air every time he appeared in public. The town that had first rallied around him started to whisper behind closed doors, their prayers for the missing baby, shadowed by a growing fear that the father's tears might be hiding something much darker. Search efforts expanded far beyond the quiet neighborhood, with volunteers and officers combing through nearby rivers, wooded trails, and abandoned buildings. Flyers with the baby's face covered shop windows and lampposts, and community groups organized vigils where families gathered with candles, praying for a safe return. The image of the father crying on camera remained the centerpiece of news coverage, yet investigators behind the scenes no longer viewed him as a grieving parent. Their attention locked onto him as the inconsistencies in his story grew too heavy to ignore. The first breakthrough came when surveillance footage placed his vehicle on a road miles from his home during the hours he insisted he had been asleep. Investigators secured a warrant to examine the car more closely. At first glance, it appeared spotless, but forensic experts knew where to look. In the trunk, small fibers matching the baby's blanket were discovered. More alarming was the faint stain on the edge of the fabric, something dark and dried that could not be explained away. The discovery shifted the case sharply, turning whispers of doubt into solid suspicion. While teams scoured physical evidence, digital forensics revealed troubling information. The father's phone showed unusual movements late at night, including a stop near a desolate patch of woodland. His computer history added another layer of unease, with recent searches that included phrases no parent should ever type, inquiries about how to quiet a crying infant, and how to make someone disappear without leaving evidence. To detectives, this was no longer the case of a stranger snatching a baby in the night. It was beginning to look like something orchestrated from within the home. The community, still clinging to hope, began to fracture under the weight of suspicion. Some refused to believe the father could harm his child, while others pointed to the mounting evidence as undeniable proof. The vigils grew quieter, and the once united town now split into those defending him and those who whispered about his guilt. For the investigators, doubt had turned to certainty. The crying father, who had drawn sympathy with every tear, now appeared to be the central figure in a carefully staged deception. The baby remained missing, but the focus of the search had changed. It was no longer about finding an abductor. It was about uncovering what this man had done. The father's behavior became increasingly troubling as the investigation pressed forward. At first, his tears had won over both neighbors and reporters, but as days turned into weeks, those same displays began to look forced. Detectives noticed the way he sobbed loudly whenever cameras pointed at him, then slipped into calm silence once the lenses turned away. His grief seemed rehearsed, as though he were performing rather than mourning. Investigators knew this kind of behavior often signaled a deeper truth, so they pushed harder, bringing him back into the interrogation room again and again. Each session was carefully designed to chip away at the mask he had built for the public. Inside the interview room, the father faced evidence he could not easily dismiss. Detectives presented surveillance footage showing his car driving into the night. They revealed the discovery of fibers and stains in his trunk. They questioned why his computer history contained disturbing searches about silencing a baby and hiding a body. Each piece of evidence struck him like a blow. And though he tried to cry his way through the questioning, the weight of the facts left him visibly shaken. His once confident pleas of innocence grew weaker, replaced by trembling hands and long silences. Outside the station, the community watched with growing suspicion. The man who had once symbolized a devastated parent now looked like someone cornered by truth. Neighbors stopped visiting the family home, and reporters' questions shifted from "Where's the baby?" to "What did the father do?" The mother remained a haunting figure on the sidelines, her silence deepening the mystery. Some believed she knew more than she admitted, while others saw her as another victim trapped in the shadow of her husband's deception. What finally shattered the father's composure was a new wave of digital evidence. Investigators uncovered deleted messages and notes on his phone, drafts never sent, where he admitted feeling overwhelmed by stress and frustration. The words painted a chilling picture of a man who felt trapped by responsibility and saw his own child as a problem he could not handle. Faced with this revelation, detectives leaned in harder, stripping away the last of his defenses. The mask of grief was slipping fast, and behind it was something cold and disturbing. Everyone knew a confession was coming. It was only a matter of time before the crying father's performance collapsed under the truth. The breaking point came during yet another late-night interrogation, when exhaustion left the father unable to maintain the facade he had worn for so long. His tears, once steady and dramatic, now fell in silence. accompanied not by loud cries but by a hollow emptiness. Detectives laid the final pieces of evidence before him, and this time he did not argue. The words slipped out slowly, almost reluctantly, as though admitting them made the act real all over again. He confessed that the baby had never been taken by an intruder. There had been no break-in, no stranger lurking in the night. Instead, the tragedy had unfolded within the walls of the family home, concealed behind the very performance of grief that had fooled so many. He admitted that the constant stress of parenthood had weighed heavily on him, and one night, in a moment of frustration he could not control, he ended the life of his daughter. Panic consumed him immediately afterward, and instead of seeking help, he devised a plan to protect himself. He staged the room to look untouched, folded the blanket neatly, and called police with a fabricated story of abduction. He believed his tears and public pleas would cover the truth, convincing the world that he was a victim rather than the perpetrator. For a time, it worked. The community had searched tirelessly, and strangers from miles away had offered their prayers, all for a baby who would never be found alive. The confession sent shockwaves through the town. The same neighbors who had lit candles and stood beside him in prayer now felt betrayed. Reporters who had broadcast his sobbing pleas replayed the footage with new chilling context. The crying father was no longer seen as broken-hearted. He was exposed as a manipulator who used sympathy as a shield. His wife, who had remained silent throughout, became a figure of haunting questions. Some wondered if she had known, while others pitied her for living beside a man capable of such cruelty. In the end, the case left behind more than just the grief of a lost child. It left a community scarred, forced to face the reality that evil can wear the face of a parent. The story of the crying dad was not one of sorrow but of deception, a reminder that appearances can be carefully crafted lies. The image of him clutching photographs of his baby would linger forever, no longer a picture of heartbreak, but a symbol of betrayal hidden in plain sight.